Well, good morning, Mosaic. Good morning. So glad to have each and every one of you here at 1045, especially those visiting with us for the first time or in the last few weeks. Maybe you've come a time or two. We want to convert you to members, so to speak, and be part of this wonderful people and passion of Mosaic. You know, we're in a season of reorg here. That is reorganization of our staff and of structures of our ministry. We had a town hall meeting almost last week about this very thing. And we want to make sure in this season of next beginnings that you're fully aware of what is going on and how to get involved. And we said last week that this season, if it in a sense had a title, it would be purpose-driven engagement. That is the idea of moving people from the pews, as it were, from the seats here, into high committed membership and ultimately into interconnectedness through relationships and leadership. And that's what we're talking about last week, the entire message on it. I just want to review that with you this morning. But before we do, I want to make sure we dismiss the students of MSM right back here to Caleb and Jamitra, right back there. Let's give them a hand as they take off, those students up there. Appreciate you guys being here. Jonathan Hatton's out of town today, but look at all those young people going back there. So excited. And we got to get them a better space, but they're making the most of where we have them this morning as the church continues to grow. Having said all that, again, say it with me, purpose-driven engagement, right? That's the idea, from membership to committed relationships and ultimately to positions of service and leadership, both here in the church as well as in our community. And very quickly, to remind you, next slide please, ABCs, we said. You're gonna hear this in the future, not always in these slides, but during announcements or whatever. The ABCs of purpose-driven engagement here at the church are these. First, A, attend Discovery, Discovery 1 and Discovery 2. B, belong or become committed, a part of what we're calling a season of life or a common cause. And then thirdly, of course, commit yourself to service. That is, again, within our church family or outside in our community. The ABCs of purpose-driven engagement. So let's run through those very quickly. Again, if you weren't here last week, the entire message, but as a reminder, the first step is to start in discovery. Maybe you've been attending and you're interested in membership. What does that mean? We're calling that process discovery. It's a two-step process, as you can see there, 2 weeks in Discovery 1, and then 4 weeks in Discovery 2. Our pastors, Raphael and Terry, will help you through that. Now, between now and September 8th is kind of like this open registration, if you will, and you don't, if you've been here, maybe you've been in this church 10 years, right? Or maybe 10 days, who knows? You don't have to go through Discovery to join a season of life or common cause in these weeks leading up to September 8th. After that, every person who comes new to the church, a new guest, new visitor, they want to become a member, they will have to go through Discovery prior to joining a season of life or common cause. Now, as you heard me say, those of you last week, I highly recommend, even if you've been in this church 10 years, I highly recommend that you start with Discovery. You might say, well, I know all about the church, I'm committed, etc. I get it. But by you going through this process, what I'm thinking is not only you will experience what people coming into the church for the first time will, but you'll be able to articulate it from personal experience to all the new people and guests that are coming in the days ahead. So you won't just say, yeah, I think we have this membership class. You'd say, I went through it. It was awesome. Let me tell you why, and it's important for you to go. So again, no one is making you do that. You can join a season of life or common cause. But even if you've been here a long time, we just highly encourage this might be a good place for you to start. And of course, you could do this simultaneous to joining a season of life or common cause. So in the next slide, what is a season of life, right? Well, we've in a sense divided the church by seasons, thinking about your age or stage of life. You see 3 up there for this year. Our plan is 1 year from now to expand these to 6 and to break these out. But we'll start with 3. The Pursuit season of life led by Josh and Kim Harris. That would be for young adults all the way through young marrieds without children. That would be your season of life. Voyagers by Alex and Aaron will be the pastors of that. That's young families with children all the way through 6th grade. And then what we're calling Legacy, led by Lawrence and Liz Hicks. That's families with children 7th through 12th grade, as well as collegiates and beyond. Again, 3 to start, 6 next year, as each one of those will break out 12 months from now. Now, if you're a single adult 30-something, you would become part of Voyagers. And if you're a single adult 40-something, you'd be part of Legacy. And that too is true if you're a single parent. I grew up in a single parent home, right? Maybe if you're a single with a child, sure, join a season of life. that's what you do. And of course, there's always some confusion, anomalies, exceptions, whatever you want to call it. Just talk to our folks, talk to the pastors. They'll help you get into a right fit, as it were, for you in a season of life. Now remember, in the past you went and joined a circle. That was a small group. Now you join a season of life, and from there you're placed in a circle with people in the similar season of life. Now, and so that's what that is. Now, common cause is something different. Next slide, please. The common cause is not, you join the common cause group not based on your season of life. You join it based on your affinity or desire to support ministry, whether inside this church or outside it. So in seasons of life, again, let's say you're 28 years old, and you might be in a circle with other 28-year-olds, and that's based on a season of life. But here, you might be in a common cause group or circle. It might be 25-year-olds, 65-year-old, all kinds of different people from different seasons of life. But why they're in the common cause group and in a particular circle is because of their affinity to work or to support ministries in the church or outside the church, to come alongside those doing the work and serve them and bless them. And we talked about that last week. So for instance, maybe a circle in a common cause forms a circle in support of student ministries. So the circle doesn't run student ministries. John Hatton and his team run that, but you would come alongside them to pray, maybe to help them with setup, maybe to go to a camp with them and help in one way or another. So that's what common cause circles do. They support ministries inside the church or outside the church, again, not based on your season of life, but your affinity for or to support ministries inside or outside the church. So discovery, season of life, common cause. Now, where do we go from here? Here's the next slide. Where do you go with this? Where do you start? And by the way, you should have received this card coming in the door. Great time to get it out, or your smartphone. Feel free to do it. But the first choice you have is, do you want to start with discovery, a season of life, or a common cause, right? Again, we're open enrollment, if you will, till September 8th. But you make this choice first: discovery, season of life, or common cause. Secondly, next slide, if it's a season of life, then you choose which season of life you'd want to be a part of: Pursuit, Voyagers, or Legacy. You make that choice. And then finally, here's how you get going, if you will. You join a Facebook group, right? Now, you can sign up on this card, and our pastors will contact you right outside in Town Hall this morning. You run right into a desk where people will help you get signed up. But on Facebook, we've created a number of groups, closed groups on our Facebook page, and you would log in to Facebook and join and click to join. It's a closed group, so one of the pastors will let you in, so to speak. That's for confidentiality and all of that. But you'll join the Facebook circle, and then our pastors will get in touch with you, right? So that's how to march forward with us. Again, we'll be sharing these slides for the next 3 weeks. Get used to it for every single person, because we want everybody to understand clearly the reorg and where we're headed. This, again, is to help us with purpose-driven engagement going forward. And most importantly, not only to connect you to one another, but to connect you to other leaders in the church, all the way to the pastors, so you have, in a sense, personal leadership, personal pastors in your life, not just the church. I go to this church, but you're connected, and we want you to know that in time of need and in time of hope, and again, to serve one another both in and outside the church. So all that's to say, we're super excited. Great services last week. You can watch bits and pieces of that on our Facebook page or our YouTube channel, and that will fully explain it. If you have any questions, make sure you hit up Town Hall this morning on your way out. Well, this morning, putting all that aside, we're kicking off a new series that'll last to the first week of October or so. We're calling simply Disruption. And it was 22 years or so ago, in the spring of 1997 specifically, that I began to ask myself a question. I didn't know it was a disruptive question at the time, but looking back 22 years later, it was a very disruptive question. And the question I began asking myself in the spring of 1997 was this: if the kingdom of heaven is not segregated, then why on earth is the church? If the kingdom of heaven is not segregated, why on earth is the church? Now, several years later, a man named Michael Emerson and Christian Smith wrote a book in 2000 called Divided by Faith. Now I'm very good friends with Michael Emerson, who's the provost at North Park University and Seminary in Chicago. But that book was the first to put into print and document the systemic segregation of the American church statistically. Perhaps you've heard the phrase 11 o'clock on Sunday morning is the most segregated hour of the week. Most people attribute that to Dr. Martin Luther King. The fact is, I've traced that to the 1880s. In my first book, I provide the citation. In other words, for well over 100 years in this country, it has been observed that 11 o'clock on Sunday morning is the most segregated hour of the week. But statistically, what does that mean? And in 1998, the first comprehensive study of the American church in terms of segregation was done. Report was published, or the results were published by Michael Emerson and Divided by Faith in 2000. And you can see there, in 2000, when the first statistical study was done, just 92.5% of churches in this country failed to have at least 20% diversity in their attending membership. 92.5% of churches in this country failed to have at least 20% diversity in their attending membership. Or as it says there, the 92.5% means basically 7.5% of churches had 20% diversity. Pretty low number, right? In 2006, those numbers came out again. No statistical change. In 2012, they came out again. They come out every 6 years since 1998. And in 2012, there was a jump. In 2012 now, that number went from 92.5% to 86.3%, or 13.7% of churches in America had at least 20% diversity. Now, let's be really clear. Just because you have 20% diversity in your attending membership doesn't make you a healthy multi-ethnic church. We get on beyond that to structures and shared responsibility and authority and systemic issues. But this is all essentially the sociologists can measure, just essentially counting diversity in the pews. And they started with this 20% number again in 1998. So by 2012, 86.3%, that's good news. We're going in the right direction. Y'all with me? But still, in 2012, churches were found to be 10 times more segregated than their neighborhoods and 20 times more segregated than nearby public schools. In September, literally in 1 month from now, and these statistics will soon be reported, and by the end of this year, and certainly as we turn the corner to 2020. No, if you would, go back to that last slide, please. In September, these new numbers are going to be reported, but it is highly likely that by 2020, churches will, 20% of the churches in America, more than 20% of the churches in America will be 20% diverse. We're going in the right direction that way. And what I want you to know is there's two things that have significantly driven this great improvement, if you will, in terms of Eric Garner, Trayvon Martin, Black Lives Matter, that has put the issue of systemic segregation and injustice on the plate of the American church. So all that was happening 2010, 2011, 2012. Not that those were the first, of course, but there heightened awareness happened when all that did. But the other reason, and this is really what I want you to know, is because of the grassroots organizing of our nonprofit, Mosaics Global Network, our profit. Now, we talk about the church and Vine and Village. We don't often talk about this, but this is the work that we do through our nonprofit, Mosaic, to catalyze this movement, not only here in the United States, but around the world. Take a look at the next slide. This is just one of the things that we do, but beginning in 2010, we started hosting the first we hosted and now put on the national conference in the United States for this issue, Mosaics Global Network. In 2010, 400 people, 2013, 1,000, 2016, 1,200. And in November, we're back in Dallas. We only do this conference every 3 years, 100 speakers, 68 workshops. This is the epicenter of the movement in the United States, as well as we've branched out. We have Mosaics Europe now, and in 2020, we'll do the first national conference ever on the subject in Sydney, Australia, for Australia, New Zealand, and Singapore as they start Mosaics Asia Pacific. Mosaics USA, Europe, and Asia Pacific is happening. And this, Michael Emerson, if he was standing here, the one who reported the statistics, he emailed me the other day and he said, your grassroots organizing through Mosaics is what's helped to fan the flame. So the tragedies in the country, but the structural organization that we've done through coaching and conferencing and cohorts and learning labs, all of these things that we collectively, this church is doing, has moved the needle forward all the way from 97.5% segregation to only less than 80%, as in 20%. That's statistical seismic shift. And my point is this: you are having a major impact on the systemic structures of the American church, and you need to know it. And I want to thank you for hanging in there with us all these years to get to that point. We're disrupting the systems of the church to position it for credible witness in the 21st century. Now, by the way, as you see up there, I would love, I know it's a Tuesday through a Thursday midweek. Again, we expect 1,300, 1,500 people. I would love, if at all possible, to take you with us and for you to go put yourself in the environment of this movement, really a worldwide movement, for those 2 days in Dallas. We got you a code. It's just $79. That's our hard costs. Mosaic Church, you can sign up at Mosaics 2019. But in the weeks to come, if you want to go, we'll put together a list, take you. We did last time in 2016, but you'll stand in the midst and you will feel the movement. You'll see it, you'll experience it, and you will recognize how significant our collective work has been to advancing this cause in the 21st century. I would love for you to see it Tuesday through Thursday, November 5th through 7th, Dallas, Texas. Well, with all that in mind then, in 2001, we launched Mosaic Church. And we launched that church, as the next slide shows, recognizing this, that the New Testament church was in fact multi-ethnic. Men and women, rich and poor, Jew and Gentiles, walking, working, and worshiping God together as one in a local church. And this, more than anything, beyond the words, it was this work of unity that the Spirit of God was doing in the hearts of people that really helped to advance the gospel in that diverse society of the first century Jerusalem, in the part of the Roman Empire. So we launched the church understanding this, that the New Testament church was multi-ethnic, envisioned by Christ, described by Luke, prescribed by the Apostle Paul. But through the years, we've come to realize that that alone is not enough to advance a credible witness in the 21st century. It's the root and foundation, but the church must go on beyond its multi-ethnicity in terms of health and structure to these two things, as the next slide shows. We must not only be multi-ethnic, but we must be socially just and financially sustainable. Multi-ethnic, socially just, and financially sustainable. Because this is what advances a credible witness of God's love for all people in an increasingly diverse, painfully polarized, and cynical society. Where do these two come from? We've talked many, many times about multi-ethnicity here, but let's think about a church as socially just. Well, think about Micah 6:8, for instance, or Matthew 5:16. What does Micah, the prophet, say? Really simple. What he has shown you, O man, you know, one translation says, there's there NIV, O mortal, he has shown you what you do, right? He has shown you what is good. What does he expect of us? Do justice, love mercy, walk humbly with God and one another. How simple is that in terms of instruction? Much more difficult to live out in our flesh and natural man, right? But this is what the prophet says, to do justice, act justly, love mercy, walk humbly with God. And in Matthew 5:16, Jesus himself said, in the same way, let your light so shine before others that they may see your good deeds, your good works, and glorify your Father in heaven. Why is that significant to this idea of being a socially just church? Because in the 20th century, the way people the way the gospel advanced, the way people gave their hearts to Christ and put it by faith was done through words. That's why you brought Billy Graham to a city. And you bring all the people you know that don't know Jesus, and Billy Graham's up and he speaks the gospel, and all these people get saved. Campus Crusade had a program. Bill Bright wrote a book called 4 Spiritual Laws back in the late 1960s. That was the way. You'd go on the beach, you'd share the 4 spiritual laws, and you would use words, and people would respond to the message. You'd read books like a guy named Josh McDowell, Evidence That Demands a Verdict, and the intellectual appeal of words on a page or spoken with the mouth was enough to compel you to come to Jesus. Guess what? It doesn't work in the 21st century. It's not words in the 21st century, it's works. People are compelled by works in the 21st century, not by words, because words are cheap. Content is not king anymore. Wisdom is lacking. So there's so much content, social media, and everybody's putting out content. What you don't see a lot is wisdom. Wisdom. And that is best expressed in a collective way through good works. The 20th century was all about words. The 21st, if we're going to advance a credible witness of God's love for all people, it is about works, the good works we do, so that others can be compelled to come to Christ. Well, this is all in this idea of being a socially just church. In other words, not just coming on a Sunday morning and singing Kumbaya, right? Not just going out in the streets and say, let me tell you how Jesus died for your sins. Do we need to do that? Yes, of course. Keep explaining the gospel, keep writing, keep sharing words. Yes, nothing wrong with that. But in the absence of works, this isn't credible. Does that make sense? The words fall flat, right? So we say, oh yeah, we'd welcome anyone to come to our church. What it really means is as long as they like it the way we do things. Words, not works. So all that's to say is we must not only be multi-ethnic, but the American church must also become socially just. And lastly, on the financial side, as you'll see, it has to become financially sustainable. And now you say, what does that mean? I mean, aren't we sustainable? We got churches everywhere, right? Well, this is what we're talking about specific to this slide. And that is this. How is the American church, how are local churches funded? What's the primary way a local church is funded? What? Tithes and offerings, right? Tithes and offerings. In the 21st century, it's already happening, but going forward, tithes and offerings will no longer be enough to sustain the church in the future. Tithes and offerings will be the foundation of church economics and financial sustainability, but it won't be enough. It won't be enough. And going forward in the series after Labor Day, we're going to spend 4 to 5 weeks on this subject alone. Next week, we'll be talking about our nonprofit work, today kind of an overview of this series on disruption. But we really want you to understand and get this final point about financial sustainability. What happens, for instance, if Pulaski County decides it's going to tax the property of all the churches in Pulaski County? How much is that, Bill? Think about a big church in the city that you know. Maybe one with a big building. Maybe it's Fellowship. Maybe it's our friends over at the United Methodist Church, Pulaski Heights. Think about a big church with a lot of property. What would be the tax bill if Pulaski County decides to tax all the churches in the county? Can they do that? Look at me. Yes. What happens? How much of our tithes and offerings would go into an offering plate and then go to the county in the form of tax? What if the federal government takes away tax-exempt status for the local church? Could that happen? Look at me, yes. What if a church like Saddleback, Rick Warren, very big property, he's a great guy, great church, expansive. What if their county, Orange County, taxes their property and the government takes away tax-exempt status? How much money would be lost to Saddleback Church? You understand? You all with me? The American church is not even having the conversation, but we're about to light it up because this church is disruptive. We have to become financially sustainable. Now you say, come on, what about this? I mean, faith. Aren't we supposed to have our faith in God and George Mueller and all that stuff and just give? Yes, of course we exercise faith. And we exercise obedience in the form of giving. And we're going to continue to do that and encourage that because it's biblical, right? It's just saying we're going to need to do something more. Now, where is a basis for this in Scripture? A little teaser to what's coming up as we talk about this down the road. Think about this passage in Matthew chapter 25. Do you remember the story of the talents, right? Today in our language, an employer had employees. Then it was masters and slaves, masters and servants. And the master was going away on a trip. And remember, he had 3 servants. He said, to the one he gave 5 talents, to the one he gave 2, to the one he gave 1. This is the form of money back in the day, right? So one person gets 5, one gets 2, one gets 1. He goes on his trip, he comes back. The guy who got the 5, what's he say? Hey, you gave me 5, here's your 5, and I made you 5. The guy who had 2, right, he said, you gave me 2, here's your 2. Time out for a second. What is good stewardship in the American church? What does it mean to be a good steward? What do we think about, if you ever think about, or what do the pastors and churches across the country consider as good stewardship? It usually boils down to these 3 things. One is, like over here, we got a hole in the wall. You know, some kids put a hole in the wall. They were playing, they put a hole in the wall. God has given us this property. We've got to take care of it. We've got to manage it. We need to fix the hole in the wall to be good stewards, right? Some people are looking over there. There's no hole, trust me. I'm just like, it was just an example. But we go, hey, we got to take care of the place. Got to keep the lawn mowed. We got to make it look nice. God's been so good. He's blessed us. We got to take care of the property, right? Another way is we've got to be accountable. So people give money to the church, and we've got to have good systems of accounting. Thank God for Rafael Estrella and others who work to make sure that we put all that money, it's all accounted for, it's all done by the book, so to speak. And on top of that, we also have to have clear communication about that money, right? So if you ask, hey, where's the money going? Or sure, come see. It's all like open book. We got to clearly communicate to you what we're doing with the money, and you can see it on paper. So those are the primary three things that define good stewardship in the American church, right? Taking care of what God's given us, accounting for the money, and clearly communicating about how the money's being spent. Are all those things part of good stewardship? Of course they are. But check this out. In this passage, that's not how Jesus defines good stewardship. You gave me 5, here's your 5, I made you 5. You gave me 2, here's your 2, and I made you 2. And one guy sat on his asset. I'll just let that wash over you for a second there, okay? Like a wave, like a black hole, and boom, just cosmic gravity force. One person, think about it, they sat on the asset. And again, the 5 and the 2 guy, what's Jesus say? Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful with a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Come and share in the joy of your master. One guy sits on his asset. Man, I was afraid. It could have been stolen. I could have squandered it. I didn't know what to do with it, so I buried it so it'd be safe. What does Jesus say? You wicked, lazy slave. Wicked and lazy servant, right? You could have at least put the money in the bank. At least put it in the bank. I could have got a little interest. And then what does he say? Take the one asset away from that guy who doesn't know what to do with it and give it to somebody who knows what to do with it. The guy with 10, you see what I'm saying? Because that guy knows what to do with it, but take it away from the one. And then it says this, whoever does not have, and I put this in parentheses because it's not in the scripture, but this is the context and the meaning of what Jesus is saying here and telling the story. He says, whoever does not have faith and economic wisdom. Whoever lacks in faith and economic wisdom, even what they do have will someday go away. So you can have all kinds of faith, but that doesn't necessarily mean you have economic wisdom, right? On the other hand, you can be all about money and trying to make it work in the business side, and you don't have any faith. You've got to have both. And a church has to have both. Not just be faithful, but economically sound and wise. Good stewardship is defined in the Bible, not just managing what you have. It's like, God, you gave us this, here is it. You gave us this building, here it is, and we made you another one, right? Right? It's about doubling. It's about leveraging assets to bless communities and at the same time generating ROI to help economically sustain the church in these economically challenging times. So with that in mind, I didn't know back in 2000 that I was asking a very disruptive question, and I didn't certainly know about what's called disruptors. In fact, in a CNN article, Mel Robbins wrote this: disruptors create new ways of doing things that open new markets, doors, and possibilities. They don't innovate from within systems, but they get outside of systems to affect systemic change. They break current molds, they change our way of thinking about the molds, and then they hand us the new rules for how things work. So think about it. Mark Zuckerberg disrupted information on the internet and gave us social media. Uber has disrupted the way we travel in cities. Amazon has completely disrupted the way we shop. It used to be that you go to a store, you feel and touch the goods, you try it on, you buy it. Now you go to the store, you feel, touch the goods, you go home and buy it online for cheaper, right? That's called disruption. And disruptive companies are led by disruptive leaders. What are the characteristics of disruptive leaders? Next slide, please. Disruptive leaders see around the curve. They create their own platforms. They simplify complexity. They articulate nuance. Disruptive leaders say what needs to be said, and they do what needs to be done before others even know something needs to be said or what it is that needs to be done. Disruptive leaders. And when I came across that description of disruptive leaders in 2016 or so, 2015, I came to recognize this, that we serve and have a disruptive God. See, think about it. Disruption is all about flipping systems, completely working on to disrupt systemic and bring systemic change. What did Jesus do? He disrupted darkness and gave us what? He disrupted sin, gave us salvation. Disrupted the law, gave us faith. Disrupted death, gave us life. Disrupted time, and gave us eternity. And if our God, which he is disruptive, surely he expects the bride to be disruptive as well. The body of Christ, the local church, right? If you have a husband and a wife, they're supposed to be one, right? So you don't have a disruptive, we're supposed to be equal, if you will, right? Our God is disruptive, his church is to be disruptive. And I came to realize that. Now, having said that, increasingly in our country, as even we've seen statistically this morning, increasing numbers of pastors and churches are saying, we want to be multi-ethnic. They're saying, we want to engage in social justice. Very few, by the way, are having the economic conversation we're about to have. But all that's to say, again, words can fail us. The question is, how do you actually do it? How do you actually put together a healthy, multi-ethnic, socially just, and financially sustainable church? How do you do that in the 21st century? And it's as simple, at least to explain, not so much always to do, but it's as simple to explain as understanding NFL football. Now, think about this. Every football team actually consists of 3 teams. Did you know that? Offense, defense, and special teams. And to win at the highest level, all 3 of those teams have to be functioning at a very high level, high capacity, minimizing mistakes, and all playing well all at the same time if you're gonna win a big game like the Super Bowl, right? You can have a great offense, but if your defense can't stop the run, you don't win the game. You can have a great offense and defense, but 3 seconds left in the game, special teams goes on the field, your kicker hits the uprights, you lose the game. Special teams fail in that moment. All 3 teams have to be playing at a high level, minimizing mistakes, all at the same time to win a big game. You with me? Think about it. These are actually 3 separate teams on one team, and those 3 teams are so different, they don't even play the same game. Sure, they play the game of football, but offense is a very different game than defense. And defense is a very different game than special teams. They're so different, the games they play, they're never on the field at the same time, and they all have their own head coach. You ever think about that? That's how different these teams are. And yet they function synergistically for the one team to win the game. How does that relate to what we're talking about? This church has been applying this model. We basically brought this model forward to the American church, and we've been acting on this, as you can see here. The American church is primarily playing a one-dimensional game. It's a spiritual game. The entire American church is playing predominantly a spiritual game. Not all churches, but most churches are just functioning on a spiritual leg. What is that? Evangelism, discipleship, worship, small groups, all the children's ministry. So everything's about the spiritual thing. And that's a good thing. That's great. And we need to be about the spiritual thing, right? But primarily, most churches in this country only operate with one team, if you will, a spiritual team. Some churches, but again, the vast majority don't, but some churches are also engaged in social justice, right? And they have an entire team, like a nonprofit, engaged in their community in social justice, as we do here through Vine and Village. Very few churches, again, at this moment in time, they're thinking about it, but they don't have a structure and a game plan to win on the economic side, the third leg. And that's what this church is about to give the American church come October 15th. So what does that look like here? If we're gonna advance a credible gospel then, as a church in the 21st century, and I'm talking really to the American church because we're doing it right here. Take a look at this next slide. It begins by disrupting the way we do church. Continuing to move the church away from homogeneity, that's all black, all white, all Asian, all Korean churches, all rich churches, all poor, all homogeneous churches, continually to move the needle forward and move these towards multi-ethnicity. Ethnic, economic diversity in the local church to advance a credible witness that God's love is really for all people, not just some people. Hope for all, not just some. Now, this is our spiritual leg, right? So this is a multi-ethnic church. This is Mosaic. And what's going on in a healthy multi-ethnic church, the disruption is moving away from homogeneity into multi-ethnicity. It's so that we can model reconciliation, reflect our community, and promote peace. Boy, doesn't our world need peace? Faith, hope, love, and peace. This is what the byproduct of a healthy multi-ethnic church is. And if you think about it, who's our head coach? A senior pastor. Who's our senior pastor? Harry Lee. Harry Lee is the coach of the church, all right, on the spiritual side. And how is the church primarily funded? The spiritual leg. Tithes and offerings, right? Next slide. How do we advance on the social side? We have to disrupt our witness. Now again, our church is doing that. I'm speaking in a sense to the American church, but we also have to add a second leg, a second team. And that team is a social justice team disrupting our witness. And what we advocate is what we've done, and that is creating an umbrella nonprofit focused on a specific community to address its holistic needs. In other words, we're not advocating form 10 nonprofits, form one nonprofit with 10 programs. And we're gonna talk about that next week. That's what we've done through our nonprofit Vine and Village here, which has roughly about 10 or 11 programs. The Orchard, Fresh to You, CPR Chess Club, Teen Mops with Tricia Goyer, and other things. But we have one umbrella nonprofit focused on 72204, though we do some things beyond it. But our primary focus is the people here in this community. 29 to 30% poverty, 66% of kids without dads in the home. At one time, the highest violent crime in the city. I think we've had measurable impact on that. You can read the crime statistics. All that's to say is we're focused primarily on the people of 72204, and we do our justice and compassionate work, not through the church, if you will, but structurally through the nonprofit. Now, it's like sisters in the same house, don't get me wrong, right? But structurally, that's how we do it. And it's important to understand the structure as we're gonna talk about next week. So, who's the coach of Vine and Village? Who's the coach of our social justice side? Well, Paul, if you would stand up. Paul Kroger is the head coach of Vine and Village, if you will, right? And so he's organizing and providing capacity for all the leaders under that. And think about it, how is our nonprofit primarily funded? As you see there, grants and donations. Are you seeing the multiple streams of income it's gonna take for a church to make it in the 21st century? So Harry Lee, senior pastor, tithes and offerings, spiritual side. Paul Kroger, the social justice, Vine and Village, funded primarily by grants and donations. But there's a third leg. And this is the leg that we're gonna focus on after Labor Day for about 4 to 5 weeks in this church. And you are gonna be literally the very first church in America to ever have this teaching, literally, because we wrote the teaching, Harry and I. In this book, you can saw in the last couple slides, I've written books to chronicle our journey through the years. Harry and I have a new book coming out October 15th called The Coming Revolution in Church Economics, Why Tithes and Offerings Are No Longer Enough and What You Can Do About It. And of course, we're speaking to pastors and the church leadership across the country. And that's, again, what we're gonna talk about after Labor Day. So, next week, we're gonna focus on our social justice leg, Vine and Village. Make sure you're all about that. Like we have a ministry fair today for the church. Next week, there's one for our nonprofit in Vine and Village to be engaged in. Then we kind of take a break in terms of messaging on Labor Day. And then for about 4 to 5 weeks after, we're gonna teach you the concepts in this book. Now, let me tell you, this is not like, oh, give more and generous and tithe. It's none of that stuff. Like, I mean, this isn't gonna be typical messages on money and giving. No church in America has heard these messages. You're gonna be the first. And having said that, why is that important? It's important, just like you understand the nature of our multi-ethnic church and our justice work in the community, it's super important that you understand the economics of this church, the model of it. Again, tithes and offerings, absolutely. We're gonna tithe and be tithing and offering. It's obedient, it's scriptural. Of course we're gonna do that. We're working hard on our grants and donations and our nonprofit. But this church also is doing this, and the entire American church is gonna have to learn how to leverage its assets, people, money, and buildings, to bless the community, but at the same time generate profitable income, to supplement tithes and offerings. I should say stagnant and declining offerings. The average church budget in America in 2009 was $150,000. 5 years later, it was $125,000. And millennials and Gen Z and all the stuff that's going on is affecting church funding and its future. And the entire American church is gonna have to adjust to this, and we're gonna teach you what we do, why we do it, so you can communicate it to others. Here's one simple thing that you know, and it's easy to get. We own this building, we rent half of it to 10 Fitness. Their mortgage payment pays, their payment to us in rent is half our mortgage every month. That's $8,000 a month. That's $8,000 that when you put $8,000 into the offering plate, that's $8,000 that's not going to a bank on a mortgage. Do you understand what I'm saying? That's $8,000 more for ministry, more to impact the community, more for staff and programs. See what I'm saying? Because this church is practicing smart economics, economic wisdom. We want you to understand that because I think the more you understand it, the more excited you'll be about what God is doing in and through us, not just here in this community, but around the country. So on the third leg, our economic side, right? Who is this led by? Well, it's led by a CEO, let's say. And all I mean by that is a quick way to get it on a slide, is a business person. Because you can't be running ministry, like a ministry people can't be running business. Like we don't get it. You know what I'm saying? We'll muck it up. Now, having said that, who's the head coach on this side? I am right now, right? I'm the interim CEO of our financial leg. I don't want to be the CEO of our financial leg. I want strong business people to take it all over, right? But I've helped to bring it out of the ground. So in a sense, I'm the CEO at the moment on the financial. And how is this leg? How is this leg funded? For-profit, enterprise, and ROI. Which is why in the next couple of months, you're going to see us open a coffee shop here. We're going to start small Sunday mornings and Thursday, but we're going to bless this community that does not have a legitimate Starbucks or that kind of coffee shop, and at the same time, it's going to generate profitable income for the church. If you're interested in being a part of that, though, by the way, let me know. But all that's to say is that it's led, this is the purpose of this, and it's led. Now, every book that I and Harry have written since 2007 all address real needs in the church, but the felt need of the church is usually 5 to 10 years away. What you're going to be taught in the coming weeks on church economics, and this book comes out again October 15th, and no church has it, and I want you to know it's not just addressing a real need that I can see 5, 10, 15 years down the road, it's addressing a felt need at this exact moment in time. Okay, let me show you this. This is this morning, the New York Times. New York Times, this morning, August 13th, I don't know if you can see it right there, I captured that on my screenshot. God saved the cathedral. In England, some cathedrals offer mini golf and a giant slide. Front page of the New York Times today. Why? Because the Anglican Church is losing members like the American Church. And when you don't have enough members and you got buildings and you got all this stuff that's got to be paid for, you lose members, you lose money. Why? Because the primary way churches are funded is getting butts in the seat who give bucks to the church. We're going to disrupt that model. We still need butts in the seats. We want to reach people for Jesus. We still need the dollars, tithes and offerings and obedience. But we also have to add something else. So here's what the church in England is doing. You go to a cathedral in some of these places, they got a mini golf course, right? This, I don't know if you can see it, but that's called a helter-skelter tower. I didn't know what helter-skelter was. I had to look it up. I just knew the Beatles song, Helter-Skelter, right? But it's actually like this tower that used to be at a fair, and you can climb up the tower, and there's a slide where you can slide down. It's called a helter-skelter. Maybe I didn't know that. That's a helter-skelter inside a cathedral in England. And for $2.50 or €2.50, you can have the privilege of climbing the helter-skelter, observing people worship, and then slide down. I don't know what the mini golf costs. This is the Church of England. This is the front page of the New York Times today. Why? Because the entire church around the world, in the Western world, is losing members, losing donations, and going out of business. And nobody knows how to crack the nut, if you will, because everyone's pitched to this idea that the way the church is funded is by tithes and offerings. Here's a quick teaser. I know I'm out of time, but let me just say this. If you're 55, 60 years old, 75% of the wealthy American church is held by people over 60 years of age. People over 60 think the number one way you change the world is by giving money. If you're Gen X, Millennial, and Gen Z, that's not the way you think. The number one way you change the world is volunteerism and product endorsement. Oh man, dude, check out my Tom shoes. You buy a pair, they give a free pair to Africa. I put it on, I'm an influencer on social media. I don't give any money, I just influence people. It's a completely different model. When someone who's 65 years old walks away from a church, or they die, as we all end up dying someday, how many millennials will it take to replace the one person from the baby boomer generation in terms of the economics of the church? Are you with me? You might need 10 millennials to place one person. You might need 15. And what is the customer acquisition cost to get 15 millennials to join your church? How much money are you gonna have to put out on worship and sets and stage and just to get those 15? Are you with me? This is all teaser. Man, this isn't even the appetizer. This is you waiting for a table. You understand what I'm saying right now? I hope you're excited, but we're gonna teach you all about this. It's right now, and it's what our church has been doing for years and years. An idea whose time has come. So for 20 years, I'll finish with this, Harry's coming up. We've been quoting a friend of mine, Chris Rice, who wrote a book, More Than Equals, in 1999. He said this: I have become convinced that God is not very interested in the church healing the race problem. I believe it is more true that God is using race to heal the church. And what I'm convinced of is a follow-up or a corollary to this, that 20 years later, I am absolutely certain that God is using us, the people and passion of Mosaic, to do just that.
Amen.